Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Emerald Ash Borer University, which is funded by a grant through the U.S. Forest Service. This is Robin Usborne from Michigan State University. My EAB University colleagues are Amy Stone from the Ohio State University Extension and Professor Cliff Sadof from Purdue University, who is presenting today's talk entitled Long-Term Ash Tree Protection from EAB. To our participants today, we welcome your questions and comments. Please type them in the Q&A feature or the chat pod, and we will respond to them after the webinar presentation. Tomorrow, you will receive an email that provides a link to a short, voluntary, confidential survey that we will hope you will take the time to fill out, because these help us bring these free educational webinars to you. The email will also include Cliff's contact information if you have questions and comments after the webinar is over. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on the EAB University page of the emeraldashborer.info website. Thank you everyone for attending today, and Cliff, you can take it away with your presentation.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Well, for those of you who have been on Emerald Ash Borer University webinars before, you're going to notice something a little different today. I'm actually sharing my screen, so you should be able to see some of the transcriptions as I'm speaking. All right. So my goal today is to try and recognize the fact that Emerald Ash Borer is new to lots of different parts of the country. And it's expanding now towards the West Coast. So what we wanted to do was to share some of the perspectives that we've gained from managing Emerald Ash Borer for the last 2 decades, and try and share our knowledge. That's for the people in the new areas. In other parts, those of you who've been managing Emerald Ash Borer and you're wondering how long you're going to have to keep on doing this, I hope that this will be useful for you too. So what are the take-home points of today's message? First of all, I want to make it absolutely clear that long-term protection with insecticides is possible and an economically viable way to protect your ash trees. Second is that applications of the systemic insecticide emamectin benzoate every 3 years is sufficient to protect the trees. But during the initial invasion wave, there are occasions where there may be some loss in that initial wave, and but for the rest of the time, the 3 years is going to be sufficient every 3 years. And then I want to talk about, after the first wave goes through, what happens when you stop using insecticides, and we're going to say that the death curve is going to be a little bit slower than the initial mortality wave, and attempts to try to reduce the costs by reducing the number of injection ports and trying some of these new systems is largely ineffective. And there is some potential for area-wide programs to actually reduce the overall costs. But those we're still trying to work out exactly when they can be effective. All right, so let's start by talking about what Emerald Ash Borer can really do. Here we see an ash tree that has the top of it taken out by the Emerald Ash Borer. And the way that worked is that we have the Emerald Ash Borer, when it comes out in the spring, it is actually will crawl and walk around on the bark of the trunk. And you can see it here. It is probing around, and it is looking for a spot. You see near the abdomen, as it comes into focus, it is starting to take its little tongue-like ovipositor, and it's looking for a spot in which to lay its eggs. So it's going on the edge of the bark, and now it found a nice little nook and cranny where it's laying eggs. Okay, and the reason they like to hide their eggs in these nooks and crannies is to protect itself from its offspring from ants and other predators that like to feed on emerald ash borer little protein packets. So that's how the eggs are laid. The eggs will then hatch and they'll will go beneath the trunk and cause these characteristic zigzag galleries. Then they'll bore a little bit deep beneath the bark, and then they'll pupate and they'll come out and make this D-shaped exit hole. And here we see where the adults are actually feeding on the leaves. Okay, so just putting it all together, right now, most of the emerald ash borer are either in what we call the J stage pupal, J stage, which is the late instar larvae. Prior to pupation, they make this form, and then they will pupate, and then they will then come out as adults in May, leaving their characteristic D-shaped exit holes because they have a flat back and a round belly. They will then fly in May. In June, the female has to feed for about 14 days in order to mature her eggs, and then she can start laying eggs. The eggs are laid, as we saw in the video. They hatch into this nice white cream-colored larvae with these bell-shaped panicles over here, causing the zigzag gallery shape. Well, so what happens in the absence of control? Well, in Fort Wayne, Chad Tinkle, the forester there, was gracious enough to share his tree removal data. And these are the number of ash trees that were removed as they were being killed by emerald ash borer. And we see that, they first started removing it in 2006, and it was about maybe 1% of the trees were being removed. In 2007, that doubled, and it doubled again in 2008, it doubled again in 2009, and so on until 2013, when virtually 100% of the 14,000 plus trees were removed from Fort Wayne, the ones that were not treated. And so, this is not a completely accurate model, but we can say that typically the number of trees that are affected will double every year. The number of trees that are showing dieback until you reach 100%. And that takes about 8 years. There is, towards the end of the curve, it might lag a little bit more because it takes a little longer to kill some of the big trees. But by and large, this is a fairly good rule of thumb to expect what's going to happen. So once you notice emerald ash borers in your community, you're going to have to start acting quickly in order to prevent the latter half of this progression, where most of your mortality occurs. So why do they have to be removed? Why can't we leave them standing just like we would leave the elm trees that get Dutch elm disease? Well, here we see an ash tree that is being pulled by my friend Dave over here, and he's pulling it onto down, and watch what happens when it hits the ground. Okay, the canopy virtually explodes. You can notice that this one branch is just flying way out into the air. You can imagine what would happen if this was in a city. That would go through somebody's window. People could be killed. So these trees are very, very brittle once they die, and so they really have to be removed. And it's really a public safety event. There have been many people who've been killed by ash trees that have died, and this is why the cities are spending so much money to remove them as before they fall down. So let's step back a little bit and think about what is going on in terms of the population of the insect and the amount of canopy thinning, or the proportion of the trees that have lost enough of the canopy so that they're unable to be saved by insecticide. And so what we're seeing here is that this blue line, we can imagine EAB is detected. We start seeing exponential growth after about year 5, and in 5, 6, and 7, we start really seeing huge populations growing, and until finally, when we see that most of the tree after year 7, when most of the trees, the untreated trees, are dead. Okay, there's not as much phloem for them to feed on. The population drops quickly, And what we see is a low but persistent level of emerald ash borer in the first invasion wave forest. So this is a image of Clinton Avenue in Fort Wayne that was taken in 2019, and these are ash trees, and it's a beautiful alley of trees that have been protected from emerald ash borer since it was detected in 2016. So this is 13 years of protection. These trees are doing fine. These were some of the few trees that the city was able to pay for. And it's gorgeous in the summertime like this, and in the fall, this is one of the pictures I got off of the Fort Wayne website about how beautiful Fort Wayne can be in the fall. And you can see it's pretty much the same alley that we see this over here. So they really are valued for their fall color. They perform a lot of ecosystem services, reducing the flow of water into the rivers, reducing the flow of water into the sewage system, and cleaning water. So they really are worth protected for many reasons. It is possible to protect this. This is the third edition of the bulletin that Dan Herms, Deb McCulloch, Dave Smitley, and I, and Fred Miller and Whitney Cranshaw put together that provides detailed guidelines on how to protect ash trees, what works and what doesn't. It's available at the same website where you registered for Emerald Ash Borer University. So there are a number of products that are available. What they all have in common is that they're systemic insecticides. So they're either going to be injected into the tree, they're going to be applied to the bark, they might be applied to the soil, but for this material to go from the trunk to the canopy requires water. We need water to go through there so that it goes up into the canopy, so that when the insect is feeding, when the adult insect is feeding, it is killed before it can lay a substantial portion of eggs. All these insecticides, none of these insecticides will kill eggs. All will kill the first instar larvae and the second instar larvae, but imidacloprid and dinotefuran does not kill the later instar larvae, L3 and L4. Okay, imidacloprid takes a while for it to kill the adults. Dinotefuran in just a few bites, but emamectin benzoate is toxic to all larval stages, and in 1 or 2 bites of leaf from the adult female will be enough to kill it. Azadirachtin is a whole different type of an insecticide. It is actually an insect growth regulator that kills every single larva, and it does reduce the fecundity of the adult females by interfering with the production of neurohormones that are responsible for egg production. So let's review how insecticides kill emerald ash borer. In May and June, the adult female, as she feeds on the leaves, she gets intoxicated, she dies before she can lay eggs. This is important. So it's important for you to get the insecticide on early in the season to actually get it to do the job. And then for trees, for beetles that were flying to the trees from trees which had not been treated with insecticide. So some adult females are able to lay an egg without being poisoned. Those larvae are killed in the summertime. And so the question is, how long does protection last? This is the result of a study that we've been conducting since 2013 in Indianapolis on some rather large ash trees. The one on the left was treated. The one on the right was not. It's stone dead at this point in time. My graduate student at the time, Donnie Peterson here, is about 6 foot tall. So you can tell these trees are this tree is about 40 inches in diameter at breast height. Okay, so these are some pretty good sized white ash trees. So we treated once every 3 years with 5 mils per inch of 4% emamectin benzoate, which was triage at the time. And there were 10 trees per treatment applied in 2013 and 2016. So how did this work? Okay, so we started off initially in 2013 with very low levels of canopy thinning over here, and then not much happened from between 2013 and 2014, but then we started noticing a rapid rise in canopy thinning, and it peaked pretty much by 2017 in the untreated trees. Trees that were treated in the spring were fairly well protected from in 2013 and 2014, 2015. But in 2016, it started to go back up again. There was a little bit of damage. And when we treated in the fall rather than the spring, we saw a lot more injury occurring because the trees had the beetles had basically a whole another summer to feed before the insecticide started taking hold. So these fall treatments, aren't quite as effective as the spring treatment. But when we retreated again in 2016, we noticed a sustained decline that stayed low all the way through 2019. And it started to go up slowly in 2020, continued again in 2022, 21, and then it's starting to go up a little bit faster in 2022. But it's nowhere near the rate of this increase that we saw during that first wave. And that's because the population of emerald ash borer is a lot lower. So, we think that, we probably want to, we were thinking about retreating these things, but, right now we're just tracking to see how it goes. So what happens, in summary, is that during the initial invasion wave, and under these situations where we had a high density of ash trees, we suppressed thinning. We had good control for 2 years during the initial peak. It kind of broke down, but not enough really to matter all that much. This is what I mean by being able to accept some loss in return for being able to treat a third more trees at the same budget if you're treating once every 3 years versus every 2 years. And then, after that once we had basically 3 years full of protection, and then, it started breaking down in the 4th year. Okay, so let's look at the economics. Okay. First of all, one of the things that I can see right now is that when you are applying, if you treat every 2 years, okay, starting, in year, somewhere around here, and you treat every 2 years, you're going to be getting some level of injury, because you're going to see the population growing, just of emerald ash borer growing a little bit. But if you treat every 3 years, treat 6 and 9, and you wait every 4 years, or you wait every 5 years, you're going to be getting more and more injury. So just to summarize, this is a little bit confusing. This is the y-axis, the amount of canopy thinning. This is the time in years. If you treat every 4 years, you're going to have more of your canopy being thinned than if you would treat every 3 years, okay? Because you see these at every 2 or every 3 years, these levels are all less than 20% if you're treating in the springtime. But if you treat every 4 or every 5 years, you're going to start getting more. So every 5 years, you might wind up having, by year 20, you might lose 60% of your population. Okay, so but one thing that's going to be critical is that an early start is critical for success, because the sooner you start your treatment, the more trees you can save. One of the things we know is that the injury is kind of like a ratchet wrench. Once you start moving in a direction, you can't go backwards. The dead parts of the trees don't come back alive. So you want to try and protect these trees as early in the process as possible. So we did some simulations with our emerald ash borer cost calculator that allows you to stage, when you start your treatment. So if you wait until year 5, and you have 16% of your trees lost more than 30% of your canopy, you have basically 3 years until all the trees are damaged beyond the point of saving. So this is probably this I would consider a late start. And an early start would be if you started treating when it's in your county before lots of trees are injured. So we worked with a representative forest that had 1,600 ash trees. We assumed that we had a contractor coming in that was going to be giving us a bulk discount, or maybe we were doing this in-house. And it was going to cost about $5 per inch of DBH, diameter of breast height. And we compared 3 different strategies. One strategy would be a reactive strategy, which would be to replace ash trees once they became unsalvageable or lost 30% of their canopy. Another way would be to proactively replace ash over 7 years, so you can sort of spread out your costs over time. And another one was what we call the optimal strategy, was to try to optimize your investment in the larger trees and save all your trees with a DBH of greater than 12 inches, and then replace the rest over the next 7 years. And we were assuming that you would treat every 3 years through year 10, and then maintenance would be once every 5 years. This was a little bit optimistic. We should probably rerun the model for having every 3 years all throughout, but this is just for comparisons purposes here. So we found that the annual cost of spraying and treatment for everything, if you start early, okay, this is if the black line is reactively replacing them as they die, at the peak, your annual costs go close to $500,000. All right. But if you are proactively removing, you can keep that cost to below $200,000. Then after that time, your costs are low. If you're treating once every 3 years, and you're replacing just the larger trees, during the period of removal replacement, the costs are a little bit higher, but then they're lower. But these costs are a lot more manageable than, say, these costs over here, which peak towards the end. If you had a late start, you waited till 16% of the trees were beyond saving, you wind up compressing the costs, and your removal costs tend to be a lot higher, especially if you're just waiting till the end, because it gets close to $700,000 in that 1 year. But it's pretty much the same pattern, just the costs are somewhat compressed. Cumulatively, when you look at the sum of the total costs over time, both the treatments where you're removing these ash trees and replacing them and not treating them, you have over $1 million in costs over the costs of your 25-year window. But if you start early, you wind up having your costs are considerably less. In this case, in 25 years, it's roughly close to $200,000 less over a 25-year period. And if you start a little bit later, because of the changes in the removal costs, you wind up saving close to $300,000. Okay, so but what do you get for the costs? Because any way you look at it, whether you're replacing the trees without treating them, or you are just protecting the trees, you're going to be spending money. But what happens is that in these two options, where you're removing trees and you're replacing them without saving them, your forest is going to be a lot smaller. Okay, whether you start early, you start late, if you remove all your big trees and you replace them with small trees, your forest is going to be a lot smaller. So that's pretty much there. So I think what that does is it tries to convince you. I think it shows a convincing argument that protecting the trees gives you a lot more benefit and costs a lot less money. All right. So can you reduce labor now by using half the injection holes? So there was a company came out called Brandt that we working with a couple of years ago, that had these pre-made packages, and you drill holes into the trees and stick them inside, and then put these packets on there, and we would we did this when emerald ash borer was flying. There was lots of them flying around, and they had half the number of holes as some of the other standard methods, which would be the Arborjet Tree IV form, and this is the Q-Connect by Rainbow, and we're using pretty much the same insecticide. And we found we did another study for about 4 years, and we found that in the control trees we went from 20% to close to 70% canopy thinning. And when we used either the Q-Connect or the Tree IV system, we had virtually no increase in canopy thinning whatsoever. But we started seeing we had good protection for 2 years. But after that 3rd year, that protection broke down. Okay, so under the same conditions where we saw the protection breaking down for that for the system that used half the number of injection ports, we had excellent control when we used twice the number of injection ports. So the time it takes to inject more is worth it because you get much better control, and you get a whole nother year of control. So what are some new developments? There are lots of new developments. This is a constant field change. There are now solutions of emamectin benzoate that are now 10%, which allows the use of this system called a quick jet air, because that gives up to 5 milliliters of a dose at a time. The way this works is that with a 10% solution, you would just drill your holes, put your ports in, and then have 1 injection per port, and it works a lot faster. So that's a nice way of saving time, and time is money, and that could help reduce the cost. So these are refinements, but I think from our perspective, I think we know that emamectin benzoate is an excellent way to protect the trees, provided you have enough injection ports and you are injecting it correctly. Okay, there's another way in which we might be able to save money is by reducing the number of trees that we're treating. And this is a program called Urban SLAM, Urban Slowed Ash Mortality. And it was based on my colleague Deb McCulloch and Rodrigo Mercader, his work here. They treated 20% of the canopy each year with emamectin benzoate to provide a background level of the canopy, having 40% of it being toxic. And the way this would work is that as the beetles are feeding to mature their eggs, they move from tree to tree, or they move from branch to branch, and eventually they're going to, as they move from tree to tree, they're going to go from a treated tree, from an untreated tree to a treated tree. Eventually, most of them are going to die before they wind up laying significant amounts of eggs. And that could slow the rate at which the population can grow. So what are the factors that can influence tree survival in an urban SLAM program? Well, we think the more trees that you have that are loaded with beetles, the less likely you're going to have effective. So if you go early on in the season, you're just like any other control program with emerald ash borer, you're going to wind up having a better chance of success if the population is low and more of your trees are alive than if the population is high and more of your trees are beyond the point of being saved. Similarly, white ash seems to be take a little longer to be killed by emerald ash borer than green ash because it's more preferred. It attacks them more quickly. And then if the trees are close to each other, so it's more likely for the beetles to go from tree to tree, you're going to wind up having better luck than if the trees are further apart, because the assumption is that there's a lot of free movement between treated and untreated trees, and further apart it's probably not going to work. So we tested this hypothesis on 3 college campuses in Indiana, and we treated 40% of the trees once every 2 years. These were the trees that the campus officials wanted to be protected pretty much at any cost. And we evaluated all the trees on the campus for up to 6 years, or until most of the trees died. And so let's see, does the starting earlier help? Okay. Well, we've pretty much figured that if trees have lost more than 30% of their canopy over here, these trees are less likely to be protected than if we had only 10% of the canopy thinning on the trees. So at Indiana State University in Terre Haute, we started fairly early on. The untreated trees had about 15% canopy thinning, okay, and we tracked canopy thinning over time. And from 2013 to 2017, it went from about 5% of the trees being untreatable and being unable to be protected to about 20% of the trees that have lost more than 30% in 5 years, as opposed to the untreated trees, which we lost about 60% of them. But if we were to use that doubling model in the absence of insecticide, by year 2016, all the trees should have been dead. Okay, so what we found is that we wound up slowing the mortality just like we had predicted, and that's when we started when we had about 16% of the trees had lost 30% of their canopy in the untreated controls. And in IU Bloomington, we started late in the game, where 51% of the trees, of the untreated trees, had lost more than 30% of their canopy. So we went from 40% to 60% in 5 years, but so the trees which were treated were protected, just like in the other campus. But the untreated trees, pretty much we went from about 51% to close to close to over 80% of the trees. Okay, so we had an 18% increase in the treated trees that became untreated versus the 33%. So we had so really by the end of these 5 years, the untreated trees, most of the untreated trees were dead. So that would be a failure, and that's because we started too late in the game. So starting early is really important. What about survivorship? Well, in Terre Haute, where we had the most success, we found that the untreated trees, the ash trees here, we had the treated trees over here looked really great. They stayed pretty well, and the untreated trees also worked pretty well, but and so we had mortality was relatively low compared to the green ash trees, where we had a lot more increase in the mortality. Okay, well, what about the proximity of the ash trees? Okay, well, here we found so these red triangle these red triangles are the trees that are treated. The black triangles are the trees that died. And we found that in this shadowed area here, most of the untreated trees here died. Okay, and that's because these trees were really far apart. But in this parking lot where these trees were right on top of each other, most of the untreated trees survived. So what we're saying as a rule of thumb, especially in this one spot here, where these trees were pretty much planted on 10-meter centers, where the canopies are just about touching, we're going to be finding that that's probably your best shot for an urban slam program. So if you got some streets where trees are close together, pretty much like that alley that I showed you early on in Fort Wayne, where the canopies are touching, you could get away with treating every other tree there, or 40% of those trees, and you could wind up saving some of your treatment. But you'd have to treat once every 2 years in those situations. Okay, so summarizing, treating early on in the infestation gives you the best shot. The white ash are more able to survive than the green ash, and trees that are close together are much more amenable to an urban slam program than another. So with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. Are there questions? We're open to any questions either in the chat pod or in the Q&A. So if you have some, please go ahead and put your questions in here. I'll wait a couple minutes. Okay, Carolyn Bullock says, do you recommend treating ash every 2 or 3 years?
The answer is yes. So if you are in a situation where you are okay, when you have the initial ash invasion, all right, and it's first coming into your city, then I would recommend every 2 years. Okay, and then after all the untreated ash trees, most of the untreated ash trees are dead. We know when that is because we see there's lots of dead ash trees. Then you can go to once every 3 years. There's another question here: is what is the smallest diameter that's practical to treat? That's kind of an open question. I wouldn't treat a 2-inch tree, but you can treat 6-inch trees, 8-inch trees. But one of the things that I want to mention is that the other insecticides like imidacloprid or dinotefuran are exceedingly effective on the small trees. We find that if your trees are have a DBH of less than 15 inches, you can get good control with those other products if you apply it every year. So your small trees, and this is probably good for homeowners as a way to save money, is that you could treat those small trees, especially less than 8 inches. You can get excellent control if you treat every spring with a soil drench of imidacloprid or one of the mix with clothianidin or dinotefuran. That would work quite well. Andrew Smith asked, is there any evidence to suggest that the EAB population will return to an area after they have left? If you look at that graph that I showed you I'm going to go back if I can try this here. Go back here let me just try this here for a bit. I'm going to go back just to the initial one here. Okay. I'm going to take this out of here. All right. So this top line are the control trees. These are the untreated trees. Okay. And so here, this shows you that over time the untreated trees all die. Okay, but it also shows you that even though we had a lot of trees here that were treated, the population actually persists in the forest. All right, and then as the insecticide wears off, the population starts to build up again. The reason for this is that ash trees are not every single ash tree is always attacked by the emerald ash borer. In other words, the ash tree a sapling has to be as thick as your thumb. Okay, so it will not lay an egg in a sapling that is less than 1/2 inch in diameter. All right, so that means that the saplings, which take a number of years, especially in a thick forest, for them to grow and start getting a decent caliper or decent stem thickness, it takes a while for them to be big enough to be attacked. So we have a reservoir of trees that are unable to be attacked. So the population can be at a low level, but then as these trees get bigger and bigger, the emerald ash borer population will persist in that canopy. Okay, so the answer to that question is the ash borers never leave. The population will build back up again, but it takes some time. So you are always going to have to manage emerald ash borer. They will never become locally extinct. Okay, so now the question is by Keith Baberny is, so the recommendation is to treat 40% of the trees in dense population rather than 100% of the desirable specimens. That I'm not going to say that's a hard yes, because it depends on how dense it is, and we haven't looked in other areas as well. So I think that if you have a dense population, you could probably treat 40% of the trees, or you could what the model actually predicts is you would randomly pick 20% of your trees and you would treat them every year. Okay, so you would just randomize it so that you would increase the probability that the beetles would run into an infested tree full of insecticide and kill them before they would lay eggs. So I think there's a couple of approaches for this. Let's say you have a street that's completely lined with ash trees and the canopies are touching. One thing you could do is you could just treat every 3 years, but treat 1/3 of your trees every 3 years and just move them around. So randomly pick 1/3 of your trees and like treat every 3rd tree, and then shift that the following year, treat the next third, and the last year treat the last third. Then over a 3-year cycle, all the trees will get one shot, but they're all going to get protection from the trees that were nearby. All right, that's one way of doing it. That kind of splits the difference, and it allows you to have all your trees treated, and gives them each one a shot at 100% protection. So what happens is that if there are any larvae that are in these trees, those trees would be all the larvae would be killed. So that's one way of doing it. And I think that's probably a very reliable way. A less reliable way would be just to treat 40% of your trees and hope for the best, because we really don't know exactly what that distance is. In some of our modeling, we found that the critical distance in that one study was 10 meters, but that was one study done in Indiana on this one site, and it was these were parking lot trees where the stuff worked the most, worked most effectively, and I wouldn't want to hang my hat completely on that one over there. Okay, another question was about how many years in invasion would you be able to drop the 3-year interval with emamectin benzoate? I don't think you can ever drop the 3-year interval. I mean, you might be able to get one of the nice things about emamectin benzoate is that if you start noticing some canopy thinning, you can go in there and treat the tree. So if it's not a very high value tree, and you can wait. I mean, I know I've done this on some trees on my own property where I waited 4 years until I treated again, and it seemed to work fine. But there was no canopy thinning. So another thing you could do is you can wait until you start seeing fresh woodpecks, but be aware that those branches that are attacked on that tree, some of them could die. So if you want to go longer than 3 years, you're going to have to tolerate a little bit of loss here or there. And you want to weigh what's the cost of pruning out the dead wood versus treating at a shorter interval. These are situations that you'd have to think about. Okay, I'm in Lake County, Indiana. Has EA population declined? And the answer is they did decline at one point in time, but they may be on the rise because a lot of the saplings that were growing in the irrigation ditches may have gotten big enough to the point where the population can start to grow again. So it really is going to depend on where you are. Another question was, will the emerald ash borer attack other trees once the ash trees are gone? Well, the first part of an answer to that question is the ash trees are never gone, because ash trees, the seed from the ash trees produce these trees that many of which can survive to produce new ash trees. So it's going to take a long time for the ash trees to be gone. So they won't be gone during the first wave, but it might take 15 or 20 years till the ash are gone. And but when they're gone, they can feed on other members of the Oleaceae. We do know that the white fringe tree, Caenathus virginica, can be attacked by the emerald ash borer, and they can sustain themselves on those trees. But they're not going to attack maples. They're not going to attack birches. Okay, they're fairly restricted in what they're going to attack. All right.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? I want to ask you, those of you who are filling out the survey, if you could let me know if you think that this subtitling is helpful or distracting. Just let me know. I'm not looking at the subtitles because I find it too confusing. So there's no more questions. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you, Cliff. Appreciate all your information. Everyone, you're going to be getting an email from me tomorrow with the link to the survey, and know that I'm going to be getting this recorded webinar on the EAB.info website on the Emerald Ash Borer University page as soon as I can. So thanks again, everyone. And thank you, Cliff. We appreciate it.